Alright, what is up everybody? So today I'm just going to make some tower busters Orgonite tower busters. I've come up with a fun plan. So let's close this down, that's a bit better. Alright, so basically what I'm doing, I've done a bit of tower busting and Orgonite work throughout my region in the past. But I thought it'd be fun to do a bit more of a detailed experiment for you guys. I've done a little bit of dowsing to get a baseline before I start doing all of this Orgonite work. So I've gotten a baseline for a few different things. So I might show this actually. I'll post the baseline chart as a link in the below this video, so that you can check out the kinds of questions that I've been using in the dowsing. How all of that is done might be something to explain in a different video, but basically I'm just drawing on past skill sets to get a gauge of the energy level in the region and of the different things. So some of the questions that I've started to get a baseline for this experiment is what is the average level of consciousness I'm in the Southern Highlands, so I'm saying what is the average level of consciousness in the Southern Highlands region now, also the average level this year and this month, and I've gotten a reading in the Bovis scale for that. So if you're not sure about that, just give it a Google. It's just a unit of measurement to measure the consciousness level, basically. So yeah, you can do a bit of research on that if that sort of thing interests you. I've also doused for how many towers, broadcast towers there are, so things like telephone towers, radio towers, all of those, basically any radio signal tower that can be creating some smog, electromagnetic smog. I've doused how many of those are in my region, so there's 36 of them. It's a whole lot of towers for a place this small, but it's kind of easy to see how they can add up. So the number of broadcast towers that are producing positive life force frequencies, there's 2. They're the 2 that I've already put tower busters on in the past. I've doused all of these as well. And the average Bovis level of all of these towers put together is sitting at 1.5k. Okay, so it's pretty low. That's really nothing. The average level of consciousness that I doused for this area was 20,000, and the tools, these tower busters that I'm making, are sitting around 500,000 to 650,000 on the Bovis chart. So it kind of gives you an idea of what kind of quality of energy these things are putting out. I'm also going to do a little bit of work with the earth vortexes in the area, so I won't say too much about that, but there are a fair few in this region. They're vortices that come out of the earth, that are part of the Earth's grid. So there's only one active vortex in this area, and yeah, the rest are just not really doing anything, and none of them are really emanating any kind of positive life force energy. So I'm going to make some little pyramids for those. Just tower buster stuff as well, like so Orgonite, simple Orgonite. I'm going to use these pyramid molds. Probably just do one about that big to put on the vortex point, and I'll activate those vortexes, or these do the same thing. And it'll just mean that it's a bit of a physical marker, Orgonite marker, to keep those vortexes moving happy and healthy. The reason I'm using a pyramid shape for those and not just a standard tower buster, which you can use as well, it'll do the job, but with these, the pyramid shape, this is the pyramid of Giza, so the Great Pyramid dimensions, and what happens with the pyramid geometry is when you create Orgonite or any kind of energetic device with this shape, you get a vortex. You can look at photos. It's called I'll link it, Kirlian photography, where they take photos of these Orgonite pyramids that people have made, and you can actually see the energy, the light flow, the energy flow coming up in spirals from these things. So that's just a little bit of a more of a applied, what would you call it? Relevant. It's a relevant geometry for those Earth vortexes. I think that's what pyramids were partly used for in the first place. So yeah, that's all of that. So I'm just going to start off today. I'm going to do a little. I've sort of got my workbench here. I'm just going to be using this cupcake tray. You can use these ones, or if you would like, you can use silicone molds. These are much easier to get these are much easier to pop the Orgonite bits out from when they're done. But it just so happens the molds that I've got are too big for the tower busters that I really need. It's a bit of overkill and a waste of resin. So yeah, I'm just going to use these tin ones that I've got. They're a pretty good size. I think they're 3 centimeters deep. So they're not huge, but a lot of the power in these tower busters that I make, you know, sizes and everything with these. Obviously, it makes a difference if you're trying to do some pretty heavy lifting. But for telephone towers, I use a crystal grid or a crystal matrix in these as well, of powdered crystals, as well as the Orgonite resin and metal shavings. So I find these are plenty powerful enough to sort out a tower, a phone tower, or anything like that. If it's a huge, massive thing that's just, I don't know, very over the top, overpowered, then I'll just throw 2 of them at it. It's fine. So yeah, I'm going to be using those. So essentially what my plan is, and the reason I'm doing this video series is to hopefully encourage people to do the same. I'm just going to be showing everything that I'm using to do this. I'll provide the dowsing sheet if you'd like to dowse for the Bovis readings of the towers and the area. You can do that really easily. I might do a video on that if people are interested on how to check that. So basically what I'm doing is I have a map of my region. This is the Southern Highlands region in Australia. This map just has, it's basically just, it's the geographical region, so I'm just focusing on this area for now, just as a bit of a starting point, I guess, and then I'll move outward from there. So what my intention is I'm currently making a massive pyramid, orgone pyramid with a big crystal matrix and a whole bunch of other stuff, technology built into it, that is going to be part of a big cloud buster that I'm going to have probably here on the property unless I find somewhere more relevant to place it. Where I'm located is basically in the middle of this whole region on a mountain, so it's a perfect place for it to be. And essentially what my intention with that is that the cloud buster is going to help obviously bring some balance to the environment, and that's going to have a pretty big field of effects just because it's just so massive. It's overpowered for a for a cloud buster, but that's kind of the point. We've got a long area for it to cover. So I'm going to start, just to give you an idea, if you can see, tower buster is going to be about here in this region, and I'm working my way out, finding all of the towers, going further and further out, and other relevant things like water tanks, so where the water storage is in the area, electrical substations, where all the electricity flows through the area. I'm basically just going to grid with tower busters all of these points, and that will give the cloud buster a far greater area of effect. So as the grid expands and there's less electromagnetic smog for it to deal with, and for it to, because if you imagine how a cloud buster sort of works, it'll have a field of effect this big, say, but if you took it out into the countryside, it would have an area of effect this big, because there's less congestion there for it to work through. So generally, there's a general rule of thumb: the more EMF smog there is, or the more greater the population of people, the more there is going on in that space, the smaller the area of effect the cloudbuster will have in the atmosphere and in the surrounding zone, because it has more to it's. I'm just trying to think of a good way to explain it. There's more for it to deal with in that area. So the resources and the power that that cloudbuster has available to it is more focused in closer to its physicality, I suppose you could say. So the idea being, when you deploy all of the tower busters out around in a zone, an expanding zone around that cloudbuster, you're effectively giving it more space to breathe, and therefore having a larger effect on the atmosphere and the surrounding environment. So they're designed to work together. From what I can understand, how Orgonite works and how this pretty simple technology works, it all bounces off each other and it all helps. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And I also have a couple of other people who have cloudbusters as well, so we're probably going to do some work on those, get those running in the area as well, and we might make a big vortex with them or something like that, but we'll do a video on that if we come to it. So yeah, that's kind of the plan. I'm going to turn this area into an organised space. It's pretty systematic, so I know how many towers are in the area. I know where a lot of them are. I grew up here, so I've sort of kept an eye on them over the years. I just haven't really had the motivation to sort them out until now. So we're going to do that. I will post a before and after once this experiment is complete on the Bovis level readings before and after, and various readings that I've gotten before and after, just to show the relative difference that these things make. I've never done an experiment like this before with a bit more of a grounded approach, so I'm really interested to see what kind of difference it makes. So yeah, anyway, we'll get started on making some Orgonite pieces. If you guys are interested in these, I can probably ship them around Australia, or I don't see the point in doing it overseas. There are plenty of people that make them in the States. But yeah, if you'd like them in Australia or you do want them overseas, it's up to you. These, I'll probably just sell them for $5 each. You know, grab 4 or 20 or whatever and just throw them around your town. It'll make a huge difference. But yeah, whether or not you get them from me or somebody else, or you make them yourself, which is ideal, I'd highly encourage you to. So yeah, we'll start. What we're going to start with is I've got some epoxy resin. I've actually switched over to using polyester resin for cloud busters and tower busters and things, just because it's a little bit cheaper. It costs about half as much as epoxy does in Australia. You just need to wear a gas mask. So it's kind of worth it for making those, but I've run out of that. I used everything I had in the big pyramid I'm making, so I'm just going to use some of this epoxy I've got left over. So this is off eBay. It's a 2-to-1 ratio epoxy resin. It's really good stuff for what it costs as well. So if you would prefer to use epoxy, if you don't like working with the fumes when you're making stuff, I'd definitely suggest you go with something like epoxy resin instead of polyester resin, which stinks. So I've just got a big pot. This is the one I use for making Orgonite because it generally makes a mess. So we've got that. What I'm using for the crystal grid, which I'll show you here, essentially the key ones that I use, we've got black tourmaline, shungite, and hematite. Now, these three here are my sort of key tower buster, or sorry, my key Orgonite crystals that I use. These are all powdered, so I just buy them in crystal form or chunk form, stick them in a blender and just blend them up. It doesn't seem to affect the energy of it at all, but it does distribute through the Orgonite a lot better, and I find that it has a lot stronger effect. Everything's just able to meld a little bit nicer, more nicely. So yeah, the black tourmaline, hematite, and shungite powder, they're all very grounding. They're all black. So they're all very grounding crystals. The I know shungite is especially interesting in that it's one of the few crystals that can actually transmute that damaging energy. It's in the orgonite community. It's known as DOR, destructive orgone energy. So basically, the stuff that the type quality of energy that the phone towers are putting out is destructive orgone energy. On the Bovis scale, that's around 1,000, 2,000 Bovis. So what shungite is especially good at doing is filtering that destructive orgone energy, that DOR, and turning it into positive orgone energy, which is much better for the human body and all of our energy bodies. So yeah, shungite's sort of the key one. Even if you don't do the tourmaline and hematite, I would highly recommend you put some shungite powder in there. It's very grounding. It increases just the flow of energy, makes the flow of energy, it increases the flow of energy in the area. It can transmute destructive energy into positive energy. Lots of things, but essentially all three of these are very powerful grounding and healing crystals, so I like to use a combination of all of these. You can buy shungite already powdered. It's pretty cheap, especially if you order it from AliExpress. You can get it from India and China. It's good. This is fine quality. I got this stuff from India. And yeah, it's very cost effective and it's free shipping. So if you don't want to sort of sacrifice a blender for grinding up crystals, and you just want to make some simple orgonite, metal shavings, 50-50 metal shavings and resin, and throw in some shungite powder and some sort of quartz, and that's all you really need to make a really a strong, good punchy tower buster. So they're the three I'm using. Three types of crystals I'm using for sort of the grounding aspect. And then what I've decided to do for this area, and in general I think this would be a nice thing to do, is I've got rose quartz, powdered rose quartz. So it's just a very heart-centered crystal. It's very healing, very unconditional love energy. That's just something that I like to add in. It's quite a powerful frequency too, so in my mind it does amp up the effectiveness of the orgonite, and you're kind of just spreading that good love around, so it can't hurt. What I've also got here is some rose. I don't know if you can see that without spilling it. This is another. This is an aura quartz, so it's rose aura quartz, and it's kind of similar to the rose quartz. It's just made in a different way. But again, very heart-centered energy, very healing, love-orientated. So that's just kind of a little extra that I'm adding into these because in my mind, and I don't have any proof for this, but it just seems to be what I see happen and what I feel both physically and intuitively that happens is when you add a tower buster to a tower, the energy that tower is putting out, the frequency that tower is putting out is carrying the frequency that is put into the tower buster. Okay, so and that's just my opinion. So basically, if you've got a mobile phone and you come into contact or you come into the area of effect of that mobile tower, you're going to be receiving some rose quartz love and anything else that is sort of piggybacking on that wave that's part of that frequency that's being created with the orgone tower buster. So yeah, that's just kind of a nice thing to do. And I'm also going to throw in some sodalite. This is powdered sodalite. It's for sort of clear communication. What else? Let's have a quick look. I had the page up here to refresh my memory before. Yeah, so it's enhancing creativity, inspiration, focus, clear communication. So all those good things that couldn't hurt to be, part of the town. a nice little baseline for the to help out the region. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. Oh, and last but not least, I've just got, this is just the swarf that I've got at the moment. This is, I believe, aluminium and iron, primarily iron swarf. I know people use different sizes and different things. I do when I've got it available to me, but at the end of the day, this works fine. There's a bunch of there's really fine particles in there and some longer bits. I'm pretty sensitive to the energy that comes off most things, and this feels absolutely fine to me, so I don't have a problem just using this one mix at the moment for the Orgonite pieces. If you're making healing pieces with Orgonite in it, probably, yeah, you can get a little more specific, but for just for tower busters and things, it does the job absolutely fine. So I'm just going to plug my computer in here, sorry. I forgot to plug it in before I started. Don't want the battery going flat. Okay, cool. So I'm going to get started making some stuff. If you guys have got any questions, I haven't quite figured out how to use the chat box yet. I haven't seen anything come up, so I don't think anyone's asking any questions or anything. Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, so I'll work on that. Cool, so basically with epoxy resin, I do it by weight, so I just have this little scale here. So it's 2 to 1, so if I'm using a kilo of the big container, if I'm using a kilo of that, I'm going to use 500 grams of the hardener. So yeah, I don't have, there's not too much left, so I'm probably just going to use all of it, most all of it for this mix. Just make up a big mix, and I'll just make as many tower busters as there is there. So anyway, so we'll start off here, and I'm just going to go straight into this pot. I'm not going to worry about measuring it out, you know, in a small thing and trying to, yeah, it's tower busters. Don't overcomplicate them. They're just, it's a mix of all the good stuff. They don't have to be pretty. Although, you know, putting love and everything into them certainly helps. Alright, so just going to start off with this one. Oh, and epoxy resin, especially, wear gloves. You get the worst chemical burn. And yeah, I always forget to put gloves on, but I found polyester resin doesn't burn the skin. It's just sticky and annoying. But epoxy resin, you won't see anything for a week, and then a week later your skin will start falling off and all sorts of nasty stuff. So wear gloves with epoxy resin, alright? Cool. So there's quite a lot in here. You just see. I usually just do this by feel as well as to how much I need to use. So we'll keep going. Yeah, it's 27. We'll see if we can get 30 grams. Oh, that's in ounces. Oops. Okay. Well, we'll leave it in ounces. So there's 30 ounces there, that'll do. So hopefully with our hardener, I've hopefully still got 15 ounces left. I don't know why, I must have mucked up the measurement at some point. There seems to be a little bit less of this left than the bulk mix, but that's cool. So we'll see if we can get up to, what's that going to be, 45 ounces, let's see. Not even close. Alright, we got 5, so hopefully this works. There's about, I should have checked that beforehand, there's about, yeah, we're missing about 7 ounces of this stuff. I think it'll still harden, it's just going to take a long time. So yeah, that's going to suck if it doesn't work, but So, if you're at the end of the bottle, it's probably worth checking if you've got enough hardener left to work with. But 6, yeah, that's a shame. Oh, it'll work. There's actually still a bit left in here. So the other thing with epoxy is if it's in a cold area, left in a cold area for a long time, it tends to go a bit cloudy and then it sort of forms into a bit of a solid. So you just run a sink of hot water and sit the bottle in there for 20 minutes or so, and it'll loosen up again. So I don't know if there's enough in there to worry about doing, but we shall see. I learn something every time I work with this. I've done heaps of epoxy stuff, and without fail, I learn something new every time. Like double check how much you've got left. So anyway, we'll see what happens. If it doesn't work, if it stays soft, I'll just get some more and just remix it, and it doesn't really matter. Cool. So we've got our mix. This particular epoxy doesn't harden off for nearly an hour and a half, probably even 2 to 3 hours if it's cold. So there's plenty of working time. You don't have to stress about any of that. So yeah, this pot was 10 ounces, so that's going to be 20 ounces to 5. Yeah, so we're only missing 5 ounces. I think it'll still harden off. It's just going to probably take a while, so not too worried about that. Cool. So the idea with Orgonite, general rule of thumb, is that you have 50-50. You have a 50-50 mix of both resin and metal, or swarf is what this is called. This metal shavings is called swarf. So you generally want 50-50 mix of epoxy resin to metal shavings. So what I've got here is I've got a little less epoxy, so I'm not going to use all of this, but I'll probably go close, show you guys soon. I'm going to have a lot of tower busters here. Actually, I'm going to have to use a few different kinds of molds. So I'm just going to pour that in. This is pretty good stuff. I've been really happy with this. Lots of fine bits and other sorts in there too. So if you're not sure, just give it a mix up, and you'll be able to get a feel for it pretty quickly as to what that's looking like. So show you guys there. We've just got our epoxy. Try to do it without spilling any on the computer. Yeah. So I'm just going to give that a mix up. But yeah, as I said, epoxy resin, you've got heaps of time to work. If you're using polyester resin, which I would recommend for tower busters just because it's so much cheaper. If you're in Australia anyway, I think in America, pretty similar pricing. So, and if possible, if you're not too worried about the monetary side of what you're spending on that, eco-epoxy is probably the next best thing. It's supposed to just be made out of environmentally friendly stuff, so you're not sort of adding that plastic into the environment. On that note, adding more plastic into the environment is something to consider when you're doing these things. I personally believe, and I feel as though the what is gained by doing this far outweighs the bit of plastic that I'm using. So the amount of plastic that's going to go into this whole region for this project is probably what some people could use it on getting takeaway in 2 nights. So it's not perfect by any means, but I think it far outweighs what we're creating far outweighs anything else there. So now, if you have a look here, this is pretty loose. Sorry I can't show you that too much more clearly. This is still pretty loose and sloppy. So I'm going to put a little bit more of metal shavings in there. I feel like there's probably a while to go before we get to that 50-50 mix. So that's perfect. So yeah, used about, I think the jar was up around here, so pretty similar epoxy to metal shavings ratio there. Doesn't have to be perfect again, guys. Some people swear black and blue that it's a fine science that needs different things to be the most effective and for it to work properly. Anything works. The more you fine tune it, the better it's going to work, obviously. But I think your intention and the love and your process that you put into making this stuff has just as much of a difference. So if you don't have exactly the right materials, don't let that stop you. I let that stuff stop me for years and it was a waste of time. So just use what you got. It's all making a difference. And yeah, the other great thing to have when you're working with any kind of resin is have a rag around, because it's always going to get everywhere you don't want it to be. Alright, so it's good with resin just to make sure it's really thoroughly mixed, especially at the moment because I'm a little bit short on the hardener, so I want to make sure it's really well mixed in, just so that it's all evenly spread. Alright, so now that we've got that, I'm going to add in my crystal shavings. With this stuff, it's more, especially with the rose quartz and everything, it's more about adding the frequency to the mix. So you don't have to have a whole lot of this stuff. So don't worry about having to spend, you know, even more than $10 on crystals to make an absolute boatload of tower busters with. So I do use a fair bit just because I buy it in bulk. I've got a wholesale account for this stuff, so I get a lot of it for a really good price, so I don't mind throwing a bit extra in there. But really, all you're trying to do is just add in the functionality and the frequency of these. These are like the programs that you're running on the computer. All right, the computer does all the heavy lifting. The hardware does all the heavy lifting. This is just adding in the programs to tell it what to do. So yeah, don't have to worry too much if you don't have a whole lot to use. So this is black tourmaline. So I'll try and give you guys an idea of how much I'm using in all of this. I'll show you that. Just a small handful. Probably more than you would really need to use, but as I said, I've got a whole lot of it, so I'm going to use a fair bit. So that's black tourmaline, hematite. Don't have much of this left, so I'm just going to throw it all in. That. I've got to grind up some more of that. And shungite. Now this stuff is, I've done a bit of just searching and looking and feeling with this stuff. This shungite is really strong, so you don't need a whole lot of it to have a really effective effect. So what have I got here? I've just got some bamboo skewers. So here, just going to use, still going to use a fair chunk. You can see that. We'll just do 2 of those. And that's all you need. That's heaps. You can probably even get away with it. For a mix this size, for it to do an effective job, you could probably use like half of what I've got here and it'd be fine. But I like strong, powerful Orgonites, so if I can, I'm gonna. So that was the shungite. Okay, so that's kind of our baseline. Real heavy lifting, grounding, flowing crystals just to get everything moving nicely. If that's all you do, that's more than enough. You can make this stuff without crystals as well, it'll still work. I just find adding in, especially quartz, is a really, as far as Orgonite goes these days, it's almost a standard, some kind of quartz. Quartz is typically an amplifier and a purifier, so it's a really beneficial crystal to have in there for its functionality, if nothing else. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to throw in some rose aura quartz. I'm not going to use much of this at all, probably just a couple of pinches. I feel like this is a cooking show. I'm just going to use a couple of pinches. Again, just to put that frequency in there. There'll be enough to be a few little chunks in in all of the pieces. So we're really just after getting that functionality into the Orgonite. Right, so it's not doing any heavy lifting, that stuff. Same thing with the rose quartz. Just let's show you guys again how much we use. There's a fair bit of this. Want these things to be pretty powerful. There you go. So yeah, just a small handful of rose quartz. Throw that in there. It's really fun with this stuff. Start doing a bit of crystal alchemy as well, and makes for a fun time. Alright, so we've got that, and last but not least, a bit of sodalite. Just going to throw in another small handful of sodalite. And that's heaps. Alright. I don't know how much these cost each to make with the epoxy and, you know, all the crystal dust and everything like that. They're probably getting up around a couple of dollars each to make, but really, again, for the difference that it makes in the area, especially if you're a bit sensitive to non-ionizing radiation, like what comes off mobile phones and towers and stuff, it's well worth it. Even just around your home, even in your pocket, if nothing else, it's great just to have something like this. Yeah, and that will be shown as we move on with this experiment and doing this work. I'm going to be taking readings just to keep getting getting an idea of where the energy levels are at. I don't really know how much of a difference it's going to make, but that's why we're doing this, because we want to see what happens. So I'm just going to mix all of that stuff up really well now. It already feels really nice. If you can feel into things through photos and stuff, if you are into that. So just have a feel into what's there. As soon as we added in all of those crystal dusts and just gave it a mix around, it really brought it to life. It's actually a really nice mix. So I find with crystal mixes, every one I do is a bit different. I kind of just intuitively choose the different kinds of crystals that I want to use, you know, based on what I'm going to be using the tower busters for or whatever I'm making. So the intended use with these is just to really up the baseline of the region here, the base frequency, I guess you could say. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about with that, let's say, for example, as a baseline, we can establish a baseline of unconditional love. Okay, so the frequency of unconditional love. I think in terms of the Bovis scale, this is going to work with my plug on. Let's see. In terms of the Bovis scale, positive realm, we start getting into a person in good health, and you know, who's doing a bit of meditation, just a generally happy person with good thought forms going through their mind pretty consistently, so they're thinking positively. That's sitting around the 20 to 25,000 on the Bovis scale. Okay, so in the dowsing that I did for this geographical region, the average level of consciousness is around 20,000 at the moment. The average for this year in this geographical region, find my piece of paper here. Where are we? Yeah, so the average level of consciousness in the Southern Highlands region right now is around 20,000. So we're getting close to that, you know, positive thought forms most all the time as an average for the area and for the people. And yeah, the average for this year has been from 16 to 20. So the average this month is sitting around 21,000. The average for this year is 16,000. So it's come up quite a bit towards the end of the year, which really isn't a surprise with everything going on with the world at the moment and with galactically. Just yeah, if you tuned into all of that stuff, you can probably see that that's to be expected, and I also expect it to go up quite a bit now that we're moving into the sort of 2020 timelines and everything like that. So that's going to affect this experiment too, but as long as everything's going up, it's a success as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I'll do a Bovis reading for what these Orgonites come out as, these Tower Busters come out as. Once they're out of the mould, I'll do another reading and update that in the next video probably. But yeah, so essentially as a baseline, let's say you have a crappy day, the baseline energy or consciousness level of the region that you're in is going to help bring you back up at least to that positive thought form, you know, generally happy kind of person, sort of positive outlook kind of person. Whereas if the baseline was right down around 10,000 or even 5,000, which it could well be in some places, let's say you're coming in as an individual who's sitting around, you know, the million Bovis in your consciousness level, in your energy level, and you go into that place where there's 1,000, where the average or the baseline is 1,000, most people are going to come back down towards that baseline pretty quickly. And the same goes of the opposite. So if you come into a place like, if you go to a place like Mount Shasta in Arizona, that I think there's some spots on that mountain that are like right up the top of they're like 10 billion. So that's why those 10 billion Bovis. So that's why those places are considered to be really powerful places around the Earth. There's obviously vortexes and other things going on there that as to why that happens. We won't go into that now, but so if the 10 billion is the baseline level of consciousness there, you're going to be reefed up if you're only sitting around 500,000, you know, to the point where some people, that's why a lot of people can't stay there for all that long, because it's just too much too quickly. So what we're aiming to do with this experiment is bring the baseline of this region from that 20,000 Bovis on the consciousness level. There's a few other ways to measure this too, which I might do, but this is just a nice easy one for you guys to work with that I've chosen to use as a reference point. We're going to try and bring up from that 20,000 up to something far greater. I don't like to put a cap on it because it could be far greater or far less. We're just going to see what happens. The towers that I went and did a tower today, and it took that tower from, again on the Bovis scale, it took that tower from 1,500 up to 650,000 Bovis. So I'm hoping if we can like just grid the whole area, it's going to help just uplift the level of consciousness pretty nicely. You know, it's all part of the bigger picture anyway. So you know, team effort. So if you guys want to do this sort of stuff, I really hope this encourages you to do so, especially if you're results driven. If you need some more concrete as this stuff can be, evidence of what change happens here. Outside of doing it yourself and seeing what happens, it's the best, by far the best way to learn and to prove to yourself whether or not it works for you. Hopefully this will be the next best thing in giving you some pretty down-to-earth examples of what's happening here with this kind of technology. So anyway, I should probably start pouring this stuff before it starts going off. So that's pretty chunky. I just spilled some. Again, that's why it's good to have a rag. The other thing that I noticed that happens with this is that pretty quickly all of the metal shavings and everything sink down to the bottom. So you end up with this, you can't really see it here, but you end up with a really watery bit on top. And then down below, it's just chunky as. So that's another good way to get a gauge for whether you've got that 50-50 mix going. You want a bit of water, sort of the watery stuff on top if you let it settle. And yeah, you get a feel for it. You do it once and you sort of go, oh yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, so we're just giving it a good mix. I'm going to pour all of these. And this will probably take a couple of days to set properly. This epoxy resin is a slow set one. I got it for that because when I make pyramids and things like that, I like to have a lot of time just to get the crystal matrices right. And you know, what's the rush really? So yeah, I sort of feel like that's all mixed up pretty well now. So got our little cupcakes here. This is so uncannily like a cooking show, it's scary, but you know, whatever. So one tip is to get it basically mixed really well and then start pouring straight away, because as I said, all of the metal shavings, the swarf, sinks to the bottom really quickly. So to get a good even distribution of everything, it's good to mix it and then pour it straight away. So just gonna, yeah, see that. Went a bit too crazy with that one. Don't be afraid of making a mess. This stuff is, resin crafting is inherently very messy. So it's just something you get used to. If you take your time, you can probably reduce the mess quite a bit, but you know, I'm not that worried about it. Chuck some paper down if you're using a table, but I've just got this big metal sheet here that I use for all of that sort of stuff. So I've actually got less than I thought we would here, so I might not even be making all of those. I'm going to save a bit for my pyramid too, so I might do that. So we've got, what, 3, 6, 9, we've got 10 tower busters there, so that's cool. Went a little bit over on that one, I don't know if you can if you can see, it's just spilt over the edge. Again, doesn't really matter. These things don't have to be pretty, they just have to work. So, just went a little bit short on some of those ones. Just go back and top off, just so they're all nice. And yeah, the other thing worth mentioning is if you do have metal cupcake trays, and that's what you want to use if you don't want to buy the silicone ones, it's much easier to use polyester resin with these and then stick them out in the sun as soon as you pour them. What that does is because you're adding extra heat into the chemical reaction there, it causes them to set and cure really quickly when you put them out in the sun with polyester resin, and they shrink quite substantially. So you don't have to worry about popping these out of the metal tray, which can be quite difficult sometimes. So yeah, polyester resin is a lot better of one to use if you're planning on using metal trays, which are a lot cheaper. So if you're going for the budget-friendly option, polyester resin, metal trays, stick it out in the sun as soon as you pour it, and you'll be sweet. With these ones, what I do, if they're stuck, which they often are, with epoxy resin, because it doesn't really shrink as much, if at all, and they are stuck, I just stick this tray in the oven for 5 minutes, and it just sort of makes the metal expand, and I find they're really easy to pop out then. So yeah, this one's going to make a mess, so I might just see if I can tidy that up a bit, get some of that resin back so it's a bit, yeah, anyway. So yeah, tower busters in a tray. I'm going to leave those for probably a couple of days just to let them set really nicely. I'll go and put those outside in the sun as well tomorrow. So the next thing to do, going to make this little pyramid. So you can buy these pyramid molds off eBay. I think one of these is probably like $15. So yeah, they're pretty good. If you can get silicone molds now, they're much easier to use, much easier to clean, and they're not as easily damaged. The problem with these is if you're making decorative pieces, they get scratched and they get lines on them pretty easily, and then that transfers through onto the when you reuse them. Whereas silicone molds, they're a bit more resilient. So in hindsight, I would have gone straight with silicone molds, but it can be pretty difficult to get silicone molds in the big pyramids, and if you want to make the bigger stuff, and that's why I went with these ones, because yeah, they're a bit more cost effective and readily available when you're making the bigger tools. So what we do with this is try and get it. What I'll usually do, there's my little knife, scissors. If you are using these ones, because they're quite common, just get a bit of duct tape, a little bit of duct tape, get it into shape. I just use a bit of duct tape to hold it in place, just like that. So then it sort of holds its shape. You can get the bottom lined up, get it squared on a surface like that. So that's all in shape. And then we get a longer bit just to seal it off. So you want to do the whole thing, otherwise the resin's just going to leak out the side, and that sucks. So, when you put in all of that effort and then it starts leaking, which has happened a whole lot of times for me, yeah, so it's good just to run your fingers, especially down in all of the gaps and grooves and everything there, especially on the top. With these ones, these molds especially, it always leaks out of the top. It never really leaks out of here. So if you are doing a full pour, I'd highly suggest you just put in that extra bit of time just to make sure this tape is really stuck down there. And then what I've started doing now is putting just an extra wrap around the cone, because I've done a fair few of these. I just did a big pyramid that's yay big, and it leaked out of the top and it just stuffed up the whole colour scheme and everything. So it basically, you know, if I was using that as a showy piece, especially if you want to sell these, I couldn't use that whole I'd probably put $150 worth of resin and crystals and things into that, not to mention the time, and the whole thing was buggered just because it leaked out of the top a little bit. So it's really worth just spending the extra time just to get these sort of nice and locked down. Now, you guys might have used these more than me and you'd have a better way of doing it than I am. If you do, I'm all ears. But for now, this seems to be what works the best. So, and I will go over bubbles as well in a sec with epoxy resin. So, don't worry about that. All right. So yeah, sort of just really tape that up nicely. That's not going to leak. I've been very surprised if it does. So yeah, that's pretty clean. It'll do the job nicely. So with these ones, usually what you get is, where did I put it? Oh, you get one of these, or if you don't get one of those with it, anything that'll do the job as a square. And I just use 2 bricks, 2 pavers, whatever. Just put that over there. Sit mold in there, and that's it. The other thing worth doing is leveling these. I know that might be a bit of overkill for some of you guys, but if you're making a decorative piece, the last thing you want is a wonky pyramid, and I feel like it's well worth doing. Anyway, just so you've got an even geometry, so your sides are all the same length, because the geometry is important with these, especially if you're trying to create a vortex. So level these out before they set as well. I won't do it now because I'm going to move this, but yeah, well worth leveling, guys. So that's worth checking out. Now, my epoxy's spilling over the spilling over the edge here, so I'm just going to put a rag there. And once again, I forgot to put gloves on there, and I did get a bit on my hand, so I'm going to have to deal with that later. But so once again, use gloves where you can. It's easy to forget, but you get in the habit of it eventually. I still haven't, but all right. So just going to use the last bit of the mix here. Don't know if I use all of it. There's still quite a bit there. Just give it a good stir. That's camera. Still got a fair bit there, so we'll see. I'm going to get a second camera that I can put as a bird's eye view for this stuff. So I appreciate you guys' patience if you made it this far. So that's a little bit more. There we go. Nice, we've still got enough for a few more tower busters. So as far as how full that is, it's just over this base. So it's about a third of the mould that I've filled up. That's going to be heaps for a vortex. I don't want it to stick out in the environment too much anyway. If people see a little pyramid sitting on the ground in the bush, you never know, they can move it, and yeah, that's going to be unfortunate. So it's kind of still at a nice size, about that big, but plenty powerful enough. It's just the shape here, so it's a pyramid tower buster essentially. So that's cool. Just put a little bit more in here. We might just have enough to do the full 12. Mix again. I think there will be enough. Perfect. I shouldn't be surprised by now. Once you do things by feel for a while, I've just noticed that it just keeps working out more and more often the more I just trust that, rather than worrying about measurements and stuff like that too much. So yeah, and this is basically the perfect amount for what we're doing, so that's pretty awesome. Last little bits. Alright, and that's it. So that was with about 20, if you're in America, it'd be easy for you in ounces. If not, you can convert it in this instance. That was, what do we have, 30? That was 20 and 5. That was about 25 ounces of epoxy that I used there. And that made a pyramid about that tall and that wide, and 12 tower busters. So that's pretty good. That was probably only, I can't remember how much this stuff was. It's probably only about $10, $15 worth of epoxy resin, $5 worth of crystals. So let's say all of this cost $20 to make, and that's going to do 12 towers and a vortex point. That's enough to cover a whole town almost, if you don't live in a huge town. So yeah, hopefully that gives you guys a bit of an idea of how you can do this yourself. As I said, if you would like some of these tower busters or a pyramid with that crystal matrix, just send me a message. I'll put my Facebook page, it's Freedom by Design, in the link, and you can just send me a message on there. I can send something to you. I'm not really doing this to make money yet, guys. I might in the future, but for now it's more just for my own personal sense of fulfillment. This is what's important for me to do at the moment in my life, for my own growth, and also just to be of service to the people around me and the place that I care about. So we'll see how it evolves. Might do more, might not. But bubbles is the last thing. So a few things you can use. First and foremost, you can just use a little lighter. This one's nearly done, so I don't know if you guys can see here. Epoxy resin is the worst for bubbles. It's just all that white on top is just bubbles, and that's a pain if you're trying to do a nice piece. So you can just use a little lighter and just go over, and it just pops. You can sort of see on camera there. Slow process, but it pops all of those bubbles. So you can do it that way. It's kind of fun. Next best thing is a blowtorch, just like a little creme brulee kitchen blowtorch, or something with a small flame. Works really well. I use a heat gun, so I just got a heat gun from the hardware shop. You can adjust the heat on that one, which I'm going to go and get. I left it outside, but I'll just go and grab that now. Sorry guys, be back in just a sec. So just a Zito heat gun. I think this cost $50 maybe. It's Australian, so I'm sure in the States you could probably get one for $10 off Amazon. But yeah, this is what. Oh, Jesus, what a mess. Anyway, this is what I use for all resin now. One thing to note, which is really important, if you're using polyester resin, don't use a flame. It catches on fire, so it's flammable. I found that out the hard way. So, yeah, just use a heat gun if you're doing polyester resin. It's not as bad for bubbles anyway. It tends to sort of stuff out. So I just put it on low, and so you can see there, makes pretty short work of all the bubbles. You don't want to do it for too long, sort of overcook the resin or heat it up too quickly. Especially with polyester resin, heat is a big factor. Epoxy resin is much more forgiving, so yeah, you can kind of just go around and just pop all those bubbles. Hopefully you can see the difference there on the camera. The other thing, I'll just wait until I finish this before I keep talking. Too much on this there. Alright, and that's that. This one's making a big old mess because the first one I did I overfilled way too much, but especially when you heat it, it gets really, I don't know if you can see that there, when you heat resin it gets really quite, I don't know what the opposite of viscous is, runny. So it kind of just, they all level themselves out anyway. Again, as I said, towel busters, you don't have to be too particular with it. So, yeah, that's where it's good to have a rag. Okay, so that's that. That's going to do most all of the towers in my immediate town where I'm starting. And a vortex, which is on this mountain that I've found. So I'll do those, and by the time I get a chance to run all those out, find those towers, and it's quite fun. It's I treat it like a game, really. So you know, it's you got to be a bit careful with you know, and choose your times wisely when you actually go and poke around some of the towers, because often they're fenced in and everything. You don't need to break any laws doing this stuff. You can just bury one in the ground outside the fence, or if there's some bushes inside the fence, you can just lob it in there. Anywhere within a few metre radius of the tower works really well. Obviously, if you can sit it on the tower itself, then that's, I mean, I prefer to do that. I also think it's kind of fun. So I treat it as a bit of a game. If I'm driving past, I just keep a few of them in the car. If I drive past one and notice it, just mark it on the map as a reference for myself later on. And yeah, I'll just pull in there and just go for a little walk, suss it out, throw a tower buster in there. Yeah, sometimes it's fun. Some of the towers that I've come across don't even have fences. You can climb them and have a little bit of fun. Obviously, I wouldn't suggest going in there if you're pretty sensitive to that stuff without any Orgonite on you before you've done the tower busting. I often walk out of the bigger tower areas feeling pretty grotty. So, you know, it doesn't take long for it to level out anyway, but yeah, it's just something to be aware of. If you've got a little pendant or something, even a tensor ring. Tensor rings are really great for EMF shielding as well, so it's always good just to have that bit of extra something for you there while you're doing that work. so that you're not throwing out your energy systems. Whether you subscribe to meridians, chakras, energy bodies or not, you spend enough time around these towers and you're going to start to feel the difference that they make when you're that close to them. So yeah, I hope this has been a helpful video for you guys. I'm going to do an update video as I go. I'll probably pump out another, I don't know, I need 36, so I'm going to do another 3 trays of these probably. At least another 2 trays, probably 3. I like giving them to people and just sharing the love. So yeah, bit of an experiment. As mentioned earlier on, I'm doing those Bovis readings as we go to get an idea of the improvements happening. And I'm hoping by the end of this, once I've got everything in place, we're going to see a big difference in the average level, at least in the towers, hopefully in the whole region. So that's going to take a bit of time to become evident, but I'm sure it's going to have positive effects. So yeah, thanks for watching, you guys. I hope this has encouraged you to do this yourself in your own town. If you don't want to make any of the stuff and you just think it's a great idea to run around and lob things at towers and you're more interested in that, hit me up and I'll just make extra when I'm making stuff for myself and for other people. I can just add you into the run there, make you some stuff, and yeah, we can all have a bit of fun and hopefully make the world a better place. So yep, we'll see you next time. Cheers.